Hey everyone, I just want to go ahead and put this at the very beginning because I want you guys to know that this is a very touchy topic. Some of these stories involve stuff like suicide. This is a very serious topic, and this is not for the lighthearted. We tried to paraphrase a decent amount, so there isn't much speaking about it. But I want you guys to know you have been warned, and if you are not okay with listening to stuff like this, I highly recommend you turn this off now. Let's get into the stories. At an overnight TV program recording in Aokigahara, night had fallen and the film set deep in an infamous forest was ready. The first section of the shoot had gone smoothly, and the crew was now rushing to prepare for the second. Everything was on track except for one problem. The two comedians who were supposed to appear in the next segment were missing. They were scheduled to arrive late since they'd been working another job in a different part of the country. After leaving the train station, they were to catch a taxi and give the driver directions printed on a fax. The crew waited nervously, glancing towards the dark tree line. Finally, two glowing headlights appeared, weaving slowly through the jungle road. It was the taxi. Relieved, a young female crew member ran to the front door and knocked on the front window. "Excuse me, sir. Could you please give us the receipt so we can pay for the fare?" No response. Hello? Could you hear me, sir?" She knocked harder, then slammed her palm against the glass. That's when she saw the driver's face. He was pale as paper, drenched in sweat and trembling violently. The rest of the crew, sensing something was very wrong, gathered around the vehicle. They soon realized it wasn't just the driver. Both comedians in the back were still frozen stiff. Their faces locked in silent terror, bodies shaking as though for some unseen chill. After repeated calls, the driver finally blinked and seemed to come back to himself. Even then, he was barely coherent, his voice quivering too much to explain. Then the rear door slowly opened, and the two comedians stepped out. Normally they would bow and greet their seniors out of respect, but now they said nothing. Their silence was deafening. It took several long minutes before the three passengers regained enough composure to speak. Earlier that night, the two comedians had arrived at the station and caught a taxi. "Here's the address," one said, handing the driver a piece of paper. The driver glanced at it and nodded. "Ah, okay, hop in." The automatic door slid shut with a thunk. The engine rumbled and the taxi set off. It was nearly midnight, and the surrounding town had gone dark. Unlike Tokyo, where all the neon lights glow all night, this area was rural and quiet. The ride would take quite a while, and at first the two comedians chatted casually. But as the minutes passed, the rocking of the taxi and the darkness lulled them into a drowsiness, and they soon drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, they were jolted awake by a sudden tremor, a violent bump beneath the wheel. Blinking groggily, they looked out of the front window and froze. The taxi was no longer on a paved path. Instead, it was bumping along on a narrow dirt trail surrounded by a thick, suffocating forest. This is weird," one of them muttered. "This is Japan. Almost every road here is paved. Why would the taxi be driving on something like this?" The driver frowned, muttered to himself. "Strange. Did I make a wrong turn?" Excuse me, sir. One passenger said nervously. Is everything okay? The directions seem correct. The driver replied, his voice uncertain. But I'm starting to wonder if this really is the right road. The two exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't want to be late for filming, but there was nothing they could really do except for trust the driver. Minutes later, the taxi's headlights illuminated something up ahead, a dark shape in the middle of the trail. Hey, isn't that a car? One comedian asked. The driver squinted. Huh. Ah, yes. It looks like one. Why don't we just stop and ask them for directions? That's a good idea, the driver said, slowing the car. But as they drew closer, unease settled over them. Wait, the other comedian said. That car, it looks abandoned. The first nodded, his voice trembling. Yeah, it's completely rusted over. There's no way it was just left there today, or even a week. The vehicle ahead was half shallow by grass and weeds. Only the roof, apart from the window, were visible. The taxi crawled forward, edging to the side to pass. The trail was so narrow there was barely enough room. Then, just as the taxi aligned with the decaying car, the passenger on the right suddenly shouted with primal fear, "Don't look!" His scream was so desperate, so filled with raw terror, that the other passenger instinctively ducked and covered his face as well. In the next instant, a violent bang rattled through the entire window. Then another, then another. The three of them couldn't help but look, just for a moment. From the broken, shattered windows of this rusted car, a woman was leaning halfway out. Her body was drenched in blood, half of her face missing. Her mouth gaped open as she screamed. Her hands clawed wildly at the taxi window, smearing crimson as she tried to wrench open the door with her broken nails and mangled fingers. The sound of the door lock being scratched at filled the air. The three passengers shrieked, their screams nearly breaking their voices. The driver slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the taxi shot forward into the darkness, swerving wildly to escape. They didn't stop driving until the dirt road turned back into pavement. For a while, the only sound was their ragged breath. Then, one comedian whispered, his voice trembling, Why did you take the road in the first place?" "What?" the driver shouted, equally shaken. "You two told me to! You said to turn there!" The two comedians stared at him, wide-eyed. "That's impossible," one said. "We were asleep the whole time." A chilling silence followed. "Then who told me to turn that way?" the driver whispered. None of them spoke after that. When they finally arrived at the filming site, they were pale, trembling, and barely coherent. The driver stayed the night with the crew, too afraid to make the return trip to home. He left the next morning at dawn, when the forest was quiet and empty. But no one ever spoke of the rusted car again.
In June of 2012, I nearly missed the bus out of Aokigahara. My younger sister and I emerged from the forest, sweaty with leaves and itchy with things embedded in our clothes. We ran to the dilapidated stop across the road, precisely 4 minutes before the very last bus of the day was to depart. At that time, neither one of us spoke Japanese well enough to describe what we found. We had been looking for a ranger station for hours now and didn't encounter a single soul on those winding paths in hopes of telling our gruesome discovery. The trip began out pretty innocently enough. I'd booked accommodations inside Kawaguchiko months ago for its scenic view of Mount Fuji. It was this eerie little town, and it reminded me an awful lot of that disaster movie, Dante's Peak. The lakeshore was scattered with large decaying fish, and it always seemed to be overcast. To me, it looked like it was once a resort town that had just slowly gone into ruin. My sister, bless her morbid little heart, had done research about Aokigahara and insisted hiking on the trails. It was around a 45-minute bus ride from town, and we had all day to explore, so I figured, why not? Well, let me tell you why not. For starters, it's a volcanic area. That means lava flow created little pockets inside the earth. Its effect? Dampening silence. While I was there, I heard no bird song or rustling of leaves inside the wind. Think of a blanket of silence. Go in about 20 to 30 feet and you can't even hear cars from the road. The trees are not very wide, but they're all quite tall. Moss and lichen grow on each side of the tree, and the air feels damp. It's the same no matter where you go inside Aokigahara. It's literally a sea of trees, and they all look alike. Navigating it is nearly impossible, and there's no cell phone reception inside the center. The little pockets of ground are also covered with decaying wood and moss, so you really do have to take your life in your own hands if you go off trail. Why did you go off trail? Well, if you're asking that. Remember my sister? Yeah, that's why. I'm positively terrified of anything supernatural or spooky, while she thrives on the stuff. She really wanted to find something. Hell, she even wanted to spend the night there. But this was all before we found them. So, as you may or may not know, people tend to commit suicide inside this forest. Some people will hang themselves. Others will choose pills, and they honestly can get pretty creative. There's also people who scavenge and loot the dead. Many, as not to get lost in the woods, will tie a string to one of the trees on the path. And so my sister, as is tradition I guess, brought this whole sweater's worth of yellow yarn. I'd say 20 minutes or so after leaving one of the ice caves, she spots this raven's nest off the trail and immediately goes for it. I'm say maybe 30 feet behind her when she stops walking and says in this flat voice that she's found something. It was the smell that I experienced first. You'll never forget that smell. I've heard it described as rotting potatoes, but that's not quite it. It's close though. There were 2 bodies worth of parts just scattered around. Judging by the clothes, it was a man and a woman, and a small rusted razor sat on this rock to the side. A woman's foot was still in her shoe, and it looked to be fleshy. A man's skull was partially buried inside the moss. I did not touch or move anything to check. It honestly looked like we were the first people to stumble upon them since they'd taken their lives. But both of us were panicking, and in that moment, I realized that we neglected to tie the string to the path that we were now lost on. My cell had no reception. I couldn't get a GPS location on my area. All the while, my sister is coming to terms with how horrific it is to see a dead body, how it actually is. And now it's starting to get dark. We roped off the area with the bodies in it and then began to spread out, hoping to intersect a path before running out of string. Finally, we find it. Tie the string off for a park ranger to find it as well. Then we run as fast as we could back down the path and safely managed to get back to the bus stop in time. We tried explaining the whole thing to the bus driver in very bad Japanese, but I don't think he took us seriously. He just asked to see our tickets before motioning us to sit down. If you're reading this, do not spend the night in Aokigahara. There are real people who die there. There are people who still go to die there, even to this day. And if you do intend on visiting and hike those hills, please make sure that you wave and say hello to everybody on the path. Hell, you might even save somebody's life.
I'd heard about the Aokigahara forest before I ever stepped foot in Japan. People call it the Sea of Trees. Others call it something darker. the suicide forest. I still wanted to see it for myself, not for thrill-seeking, not for morbid curiosity. I just wanted to understand why this place carried such a heavy reputation. The drive there was almost peaceful. Villages slipped by, the mountains air crisp and cool, Mount Fuji rising in the distance like it was just watching. But the closer I got, the heavier the atmosphere felt, like I was driving towards the place that didn't want to be found. The parking lot seemed ordinary enough, tour buses, vending machines humming, and a map that looked more like something you'd see in a park. But the second I stepped past the tree line, everything shifted. The forest swallowed the light. It was so quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustles of the wind through branches, just stillness. At first I told myself it was beautiful. Moss draped over roots like green velvet. The air damp and cool, the trees impossibly odd. But then I started noticing the signs nailed to trunks. I've been to a lot of places people call haunted. Old houses, forgotten hospitals, graveyards where the ground seemed to whisper underfoot. But Aokigahara was different. It wasn't haunted by ghosts or urban legends. It was haunted by truth. By the hundreds of people who stepped into that forest and never walked out. By the grief left behind. By the silence that just seemed to soak into the trees themselves. There weren't warnings about bears or trails being closed. There was please. Your life is a precious gift. Please think of your family. You are not alone. Each one felt like a voice reaching out of the silence, and with every step deeper, my chest grew tighter. Not long after, I came across what looked like to be a campsite. A tent collapsed and rotting, half buried under leaves. Food wrappers scattered in the dirt. A single shoe sitting off to the side, almost like someone had stepped out of it. I bent down, just curious. And that's when I noticed something scratched into the nylon of the tent. A name written over and over again, etched so deep that the fabric was torn. The forest was silent, but in that moment, I swore I could feel the weight of whoever had once sat inside that tent. The deeper I went, the more disorienting it became. The trees all looked the same, tall, twisted, pressing close like walls. My compass spun uselessly in my hand, the needle circling as if it couldn't make up its own mind. I had brought a length of string with me, just like I'd read about online, and I tied it to a branch as I went. The thin line of red felt like the only thing tethering me to the outside world. Then I heard it. The crack, like a branch snapping somewhere ahead. I froze. It wasn't behind me. It wasn't to the side. It was just right in front of me. I whispered, "Hello?" But the sound barely carried, as if the trees had swallowed my voice whole. The forest gave nothing back. I don't know how long I walked after that. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. But I'll never forget what I stumbled on next. A splash of red and a green. A jacket, faded and weather-worn, half crossed by moss. And beneath it, bones. They were scattered, tangled in roots, a skull tilted back towards the canopy. Mouth open as a mid-scream. A rope dangled from a low branch above. My knees went weak. I told myself I was prepared for this. I'd read the stories, seen the headlines, but nothing prepared me for the reality. The forest wasn't just haunted by tales. It was holding on to people. I turned immediately, clutching the string like it was the last chance at survival. But the deeper I breathed, the more I felt like the silence pressed in, like the forest itself was following me. The stories that I'd heard before, about shadows moving between the trees, about voices calling your name, suddenly didn't feel like stories anymore. I didn't dare look over my shoulder, but I swore I felt eyes on me the whole way back. The path stretched forever. Every knot in the string, every tree looked the same. My flashlight caught strange shapes in the distance, maybe branches, maybe something else. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out the silence. And then, just as it suddenly began, the trees thinned. Light poured through the branches. I stumbled back into the parking lot, blinking against the brightness, surrounded once again by vending machines and car engines that just hummed like the everyday world. I wanted to run to my car and never look back, but as I reached the door handle, I paused. The forest was behind me, dark and endless, and in that moment, I swore I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise of the living world. But it was there. My name. I didn't turn around. I just got in my car and drove. Even now, miles and months away, I sometimes wake up at night, certain I still hear it, soft and patient, calling me back to the sea of trees. Another, and perhaps the most chilling incident occurred in the Aokigahara while filming at night happened near the Inagawa area. A young film crew ventured into the forest to capture some footage for a documentary. While investigating and navigating through the dense, twisted paths, they came across something deeply unsettling. It was the dead of winter, the ground coated in frost, yet the woman's body was still clothed like summertime. The strange detail unsettled the crew, especially one young man who couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Later that night, while setting up all these cameras, he spotted a woman wandering silently between the trees, wearing the exact same summer outfit. Convinced it wasn't possible, he followed her through the dark maze of tangled branches. The deeper he went, the colder and quieter the forest became. Finally, he stumbled into a small clearing and froze in terror. The figure he had been following was gone. At his feet lay a very same corpse that they discovered earlier, in the same summer clothing. Shaken to his core, he rejoined his crew and said nothing, though his behavior became increasingly erratic. A few days later, the director received a frantic call from the young man, his voice trembling with terror as he begged for help, saying he didn't understand what was happening, but something was wrong. Something was following him. He pleaded to keep the line open so he wouldn't be alone. Alarmed, the director rushed to his location. When he arrived at the young man's apartment, he found him in the middle of an attempt of something by a rope. Still alive, but barely. The director cut him down and called for help. Once stabilized, the young man insisted that he had no memory of why he even tried to take his own life. He was terrified, convinced that something had been controlling him, whispering to him in his sleep. Several days later, he mysteriously vanished without a trace. His last known sighting was near the edge of Aokigahara. Witnesses reported seeing him standing motionless at the forest entrance as though listening to a distant voice calling his name. Neither him nor his body was ever found. Some say if you stand deep enough in the forest on the winter's night, you can hear a faint, pleading cry for help. The echoes of the young man forever wandering the woods, answering the call that lured him to his doom. Now, before we get into the outro, I just want you guys to know that if you guys did make it through this, and if you guys are feeling some type of way, I will make sure to add a hotline just in case, because I know this is a very touchy subject on some of these stories. Make sure to reach out if you have any type of feeling, if this has been something mentally to affect you, if this has caused some type of trauma. Make sure to reach out to somebody. Make sure to reach out. There are people that will talk to you, whether it's family or strangers, whichever you prefer. I want that to be known. I'm going to make sure to have it right here on the screen just in case. I care about all of you, each and every single one of you. I want you guys to know that if you feel some type of way, there is somebody that will help. You are not alone. You will never be alone. There's always going to be somebody there. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you would like to see more of this, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, and I just want to say I apologize if I did upset or offend anybody. But if you enjoyed what you watched, make sure to subscribe. Huge, massive shout out to, I think, like the very first person I ever worked with on anything. The one and only, my bestie for the resty, the one and only Booze and Booze. This man is a hard-working man, and he is constantly working. So for him to actually take the time to be able to do something like this, it means the world to me. It's been a very long time since we've actually been able to collab. He's been busy, I've been busy. He's been working, I've been working. But we finally were able to do it. Massive shout out and a huge thank you to him. Make sure to go check him out. I feel like a lot of you guys actually do know him and probably do listen to his content. Trust me, I still listen to his content to this day. But make sure to check him out. Links in the description, Twitter, Instagram, everything like that for me is also going to be in there. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one.